Hello. Today I would like to make a tier list for class strength for TBC Classic. I feel like now is a decent time to bring it out because I was recently looking at logs going from Phase 1 to Phase 4, and there really hasn't been that much change. In addition, I have seen other content produced before TBC released saying that some classes were going to be extremely strong and some of them weak, and some of them were, and some of them were not. So I would like to make a definitive tier list to correct some of this guessing people were making before the expansion, and I'll show some logs to prove it. So on screen right now are 4 different places in which people are making tier lists on strength of classes. Some notable thing that we will be dispelling is that most of these places have BM Hunters and Destruction Warlocks definitely in S tier, partially true, partially not. All of them have Elemental Shamans very high up. Most of them have Fire Mages at least equivalent to Arcane, and some of them have Boomkins up quite a ways, and Fury Warriors are pretty much non-existent. So while some of these specs were decent guesses, some of them were extremely far off. So to show what the tier list that I've created after looking at logs over the past 10 months of gameplay, this is my result, and I will go through each spec. So the philosophy behind this tier list is that you basically have 3 DPS classes that you want to bring, and that is Arcane Mages, Fury Warriors, and Destruction Warlocks. The reason for these 3 classes is basically because they have some sort of AoE. So this tier list is based on overall strength and not just boss fight strength. The reason for this is because the game is pretty easy. Of course you're going to kill the bosses, but if you want to speedrun and or save time and or clear efficiently, you're going to want AoE damage and or best overall damage. So this is the best overall damage tier list. And since Arcane, Fury, and Destruction have AoE abilities and others don't, scaling really doesn't matter. So you can scale a Balanced Druid to the high heavens, but Arcane Explosion will beat out Hurricane no matter what, even if the Balanced Druid had 10,000 spell damage. So this isn't really a scaling issue, this is more of a class limitation issue, that these 3 DPS specs will be the top and always be the top. And basically any other DPS class that we will be bringing will be either giving utility to the raid or buffing these 3 classes. So now I'll go through each spec on the tier list and how they buff and or what they bring to the raid. Prop Paladin is number 1 S tier. The reason for this is because you cannot AoE if you don't have a Prop Paladin. So while all of our energy is being focused into AoE cleave damage classes, you're definitely not going to have a Prop Warrior being able to hold threat on them. So if you didn't have a Prop Paladin, there's going to be lots of pipes. You're only going to be able to pull a few mobs at a time. With a Prop Paladin, you can pull 5, 10, 20 mobs. Double pack pulls, triple pack pulls, you just need one. That's why they're S tier, they're irreplaceable, you cannot replace them with any other class. Next is Arcane Mages. Arcane Mages, obviously S tier, they have the best AoE in the game, they have extremely high burst because boss fights are pretty short, since a lot of people are min-maxing, bosses die sub 2 minutes, sub 3 minutes, especially in our current phase, which is Phase 3 and Phase 4, so that's why they're S tier. And their overall damage is slightly higher than Fury Warriors and a decent amount higher than Destruction right now, and that has been pretty true throughout the whole entire expansion. Next on the list is S tier Fury Warrior. So while people were predicting Fury Warrior to be C or D tier, that is not the case, even in Phase 1, without their scaling. So again, it's the really only melee class that has a consistent AoE cleave. They do high damage, they have plate so they don't die as much, and they have an interrupt, which is definitely needed for speedruns, as you will be pulling multiple packs. Typically they'll have multiple casters, and you need kicks. Next is Destruction Warlocks, kind of in the place where most people were predicting. Most people were predicting S tier. I would actually put them in A tier. They don't do as much damage as people were thinking. Their Seed of Corruption was thought to be the highest AoE damage. It's not. Arcane Explosion is, but they do have one thing on Arcane Mages, and that is Life Tap. And in addition to that, there is a limitation to how many Arcane Mages you can bring to the raid. Typically, or pretty much always, You're never going to bring over 3 Arcane Mages, just because they kind of need to be in a Shadow Priest group, and they kind of need innervates. So while you could bring 6 Destruction Warlocks to a raid, which has been seen in Phase 2, you cannot do that for mages. So Destruction Warlocks, very good class. Again, they are the one of 3 specs that all your focus will be put into. That's why they are A tier. Next is Feral Tanks. Again, similar to Prop Paladins, they do something no other tank can do, and that is do good damage. So if they're off-tanking, which they typically are, just because they do twice as much damage as the others, more damage, faster the raids, that's why you're bringing a Feral Tank. In addition to this, they have a Battle Res, which is pretty helpful. So after all those classes, I will now go into a support role. So these classes, whether they do decent damage, medium damage, or low damage, doesn't really matter. They're going to be brought. You need at least one of them. So the first one is a Shadow Priest. Shadow Priests are literally insane with the utility that they bring. They increase the shadow damage mobs take, which you will need for the Destruction Warlocks. They will be in your Arcane Mage group for mana regen, which your Arcane Mages need, and they bring an overall spell damage buff to the whole raid, which both your 2 of 3 damage dealers that we're focusing on need. So, yep, Shadow Priest always going to be brought, at least one of them. They are insane. Next is a Holy Paladin. The reason Holy Paladin is in raid buff tier is because in an ideal comp, a Paladin would actually go 21 points into Retribution to buff the Prop Paladin's damage with Sanctity Aura. Again, the reason for this is if your Prop Paladin is doing 10% more damage, then you can pull more because you have better threat. And the reason we don't want a Ret Paladin running this is because we don't want a Ret Paladin in the group, because a Ret Paladin is not a Fury Warrior. So that's why, in addition to that, they are going to bring the second Blessing. Next is Enhanced Shamans. So while Shadow Priest is needed for our caster DPS, Enhanced Shaman is needed for our Fury damage. So in ideal raid comp, you're bringing 4 Fury Warriors, so you'll bring 2 Enhanced Shamans. Their totems are insane, Heroism is insane, and their attack power buff, so they're being brought. Next is an Affliction Warlock. For 10 mans they're not brought, but for 25 mans they are. They basically do the same things as a Destruction Warlock, except just a little bit less. But that little bit less doesn't really matter because they're bringing another 3% overall damage buff for our casters, which is a majority of our damage. So, yep, one of them will be brought. And same thing with Affliction is Arms and Survival. So 1 Arms and 1 Survival is being brought because even though they do less damage than a Fury Warrior, the buff that they bring, which is a physical damage buff and an attack power buff, will make up for the lost damage from a Fury. In addition to that, Hunters have Scorpion Skin, which will be helpful for boss damage taking, so those classes are brought. Next is B tier. The reason Resto Shamans are not A tier and they are the highest in B tier is because they run a lot faster than most other healers. If they had better mana regen, they would be A tier. This is not the case, so they're B tier. But aside from that, they're insane. I mean, they're a shaman, so they bring totems and heroism, and they bring your raid healing. So in a best comp, you're bringing 3 Resto Shamans, Chain Heal Go Burr, insane class. Next is Resto Druids. So Resto Druids are B tier just because they have insane overall healing. They can heal the raid, heal the tanks, and this Resto Druid will be spec'd into Improved Fairy Fire. The reason for that is because Boomkins are not Destruction Warlocks, so we're not going to bring them. Even though 5% crit is nice, it does, or definitely does not make up for the DPS loss, bringing a Balanced Druid over a Destruction B. In a similar note, just like Paladins bringing utility and Druids bringing utility, is Disc Priest. So we're not bringing a Holy Priest, we're bringing a Disc Priest because Disc Priests give buffs. The Spear buff is insane for Arcane Mages and is good for casters in general, just because the Spirit gets converted into spell damage. In addition, they bring PI, which you can give your best DPS. Will typically be an Arcane Mage, especially because it synergizes, because PI gives 20% less mana cost. And in addition to this, they have Pain Suppression, which I suggest. The reason for this is because you want to pull lots of mobs, so there can be pulls where you pull 2, 3, 4 packs together, and Prop Paladin might die if you pull 3 or 4 packs, so you're going to want a pain suppression for that. That's why you're bringing a Disc Priest. All these next specs are specs that are decent, but I do not suggest for a perfect raid comp. So this next one is Rep Paladin. So while Rep Paladin would bring a third Rep Pally buff, it is not an insane damage increase for our casters and Fury Warriors. Not enough to make up for the damage difference between a Fury Warrior and a Rep Paladin, though it is close, especially if the Rep Paladin has a Spell Power set. So Rep Paladin would put on their Spell Power set so that their Consecration actually does damage on massive AoE pulls, and this would keep up their overall damage to be closer to a Fury Warrior, but this is kind of hard to pull off, and especially if you don't have infinite gear, so very good class. I don't suggest it being brought, but is in a solid B tier. Next is BM Hunters. Pretty much everyone was saying BM Hunter is S tier because they do a lot of damage, which they do a lot of damage for single target, kind of. At least in Phase 1 and Phase 3 they do. Phase 2, not really so much, but they do not have any AoE, so they're not a Fury Warrior, they're not an Arcane Mage, and they're not a Destruction Warlock, so they will not be brought. Next is a Combat Rogue. They're not a Fury Warrior, even though they do bring a kick, which we would want. They're not a Fury Warrior. Unlucky that they don't have a cleave that is spammable, so they will not be brought. Next is Elemental Shaman. Another class that was predicted to be A tier or S tier is actually falling out of favor. So while previously in Phase 1 and Phase 2, a lot of Elementals were being brought because a lot of people were stacking Destruction Warlocks, in recent phases they are being replaced by Resto Shamans. So the logic behind that is why bring a Elemental over a Resto? You're going to kind of want 3 Restos. So they bring all the totems that they want, except for the hit and crit totem, which most of your damage is going to be on trash. So even the hit and crit totem is half worthless because the hit rating is worthless. But yeah, 3% crit is definitely not worth the damage difference between an elemental and a destruction. So they are not being brought any. Next is probably the weirdest spec on the list, and that is Frost Mage. The reason I put it in C tier is because I believe it is being underutilized. So, like I've talked about, with a Prop Pally, you can pull 1, 2, 3, 4 packs, and how the Prop Pally is going to survive that is partially because of the pain suppression that the Disc Priest is bringing, but also a Frost Mage. So, 90% slow on Blizzard is insane. I don't think any top clearing speedrun guilds are running a Frost Mage. I think it's being underutilized. If you can increase the survivability of your Prop Paladin because no melee can hit them, it should speed up clear times. So Frost Mage is a little bit weird. It could be griefing your raid because it's not an Arcane Mage, but it also could be all the way up to A tier, which you would need one if you're going to pull off specific very large pulls. So yeah, Frost Mage is a little weird one. I'll just put it in C tier just because. Next is Holy Priest. I think Holy Priest is pretty bad. The reason for this is because you already have your raid all healed up from bringing 3 Resto Shamans, so why would you need another AoE heal when you already have 3 AoE healers? In addition, it doesn't bring the Pain Suppress, and it doesn't bring the raid buff of a Spirit buff or a PI, so you're kind of griefing on the damage by not taking that, and the only thing you're picking up, again, is an AoE heal, which you don't need. So, yep. The only reason, or the only time that you bring a Holy Priest is if you wanted to 5 heal versus 6 heal, so you can bring a entirely new DPS, but this is kind of mitigated, kind of like I said, because 3 of our healers is kind of going a supporty build with our Holy Pally, Resto Druid, and Disc Priest. They're not going full HPS, they're going supporty. So even though we have 6 healers, it's not really 6 healers, it's kind of 5 healers with a bunch of supports. So yeah, Holy Priest, not good. Next, Balanced Druid, kind of similar boat as Elemental, except way worse. So at least Elemental, they have totems and heroism, which is strong, but can be replaced, like I said, by a Resto Shaman. But yeah, Balanced Druid, 5% crit buff, and a Battle Res is definitely not worth the loss of a Destruction Warlock. So they are not brought. Next is a Prot Warrior. Prot Warrior, the only thing that they do well is they actually have tank cooldowns. So on massive pulls or massive hits, they can survive. But this is mitigated by having a Disc Priest and just healing the tank, I guess. Like, there's not many things in the game that's going to kill your tanks if they're geared correctly. So yeah, Prot Warrior, not needed, and a Disc Priest has Pain Suppress if things get wild. So you really don't need the tank cooldown then. Next is griefing your raid tier. This is Fire. Many predictions had Fire equal to Arcane, especially in Phase 1 and also in Sunwell. But yeah, Fire has been terrible. It does nothing better than Arcane, and you're already supporting your Arcane and Destruction with a bunch of supports. You're going to have a Shadow Priest for your Arcane mages, so mana isn't a huge issue, and you're going to have Innervates from your Resto Druid and your Feral Tech anyway that you're bringing for the debuffs and for a strong off tank. So mana's not an issue. Fire is Grief in the Raid. Demo, again, Grief in the Raid, just be Destruction forehead. Feral DPS, they don't have any AoE, so you're Grief in the Raid, just be a Fury Warrior. Hunter, just be a BM Hunter, but even if you're a BM Hunter, you're not going to make any raid anyway, so yeah, Hunters, sorry, just be Survival, I guess. Sub Rogue, I'm not sure why you're raiding, just PvP. And Assassination Rogue, yeah, I don't know, log off and quit the game, I guess. So now I will show logs of where my tier list was created from. This will be logs of the fastest clears of each raid in each phase. So this will be the first one. This is Crusade, the fastest clear in phase 1. And this is the raid comp. As you can see, Arcane Mages at the top with Warlocks, a Hunter, Elemental Shaman, Warrior. The Warrior parsed only 73%. If it would parse 90% like the others, it would probably be beating the Elemental and Hunter. So a little bit grief in the raid, but still strong in phase 1. I mean, people are putting Warrior in D tier. Definitely not D tier. They're still good in phase 1. And as you can see, Crop Pally's being brought, Feral being brought, and a Shadow Priest. All the ones that are in high support role or in S tier or A tier. And since it's a 10-man raid and it's Karazhan, it's easy. So they only brought one healer, and that's why they had the Elemental Shaman. They probably would have dropped the Elemental Shaman if they needed another healer. They didn't, so they just needed 2 Shamans. That's why they have the Elemental. So that's phase 1, Karazhan. Next is the only log that I'll show for a single boss. So instead of Karazhan being a 40-minute run that shows overall damage, this is just a 2-minute fight. So basically, if you can burst a lot of damage in 2 minutes, you're going to be at the top. That's why Hunters are at the top, even though I put them in B tier. But yeah, this is the breakdown. People are still running Elementals. People are still running Hunters. They have 1 Shadow Priest. They have a Prop Paladin. For some reason they brought a Boomkin. Whatever. This is just a 2-minute fight. I just show it just to show it. Next is SSC. So here we go back to actual overall damage instead of just a 2-minute fight. Again, you're just going to bring 3 mages in the Shadow Priest group. You can't really bring more than that. Here we've seen a shit ton of Warlocks. Warlocks are pretty good because you can stack a bunch of them, and in phase 2 they were better than Warriors, unlike phase 3. One major thing though is that back in phase 2 people were still thinking Elementals were decent. They're not. In my opinion, you shouldn't have run these Elementals. The Resto Shamans should have been in the Elementals, and the tanking scenario again is similar. You're bringing Paladins, no Warriors, and an off-tank Feral, and you're bringing a single Hunter for the debuff. Next is Tempest Keep. Again, similar, except Hunters are a little bit higher than normal, just because there's not that much trash in Tempest Keep, but Mages at the top, and then Warlocks, and then Warriors. Scaling hasn't set in, so Warriors are doing less than they are now. They're still bringing a bunch of Hunters. Again, they're decent, but not as good as Warlocks and Mages and Warriors. Maybe equal to Warriors, at least for KT, but they're still bringing 2 Elemental Shamans. Again, just bring Resto Shaman. This comp probably would have been better if you had 4 Fury Warriors and then double Enhanced Shaman, but they didn't. Oh well. That's the breakdown. Now here's the phase we're in. This is Hyjal. Again, kind of weird, because it's basically just massive AoE, so obviously Mages and Warlocks are going to be at the top by a lot. Mages are better AoE than Warlocks, that's why they're S tier versus A tier. The supporting cast comes in. Warriors, they're top besides Mages and Warlocks, and here's the support. And this is the first time where we're dropping Elemental Shamans. As you can see, we're bringing double Enhance and triple Resto Shaman, which I suggest and probably would have suggested in phase 2 also. So that's the comp right now. Next is Black Temple. And so even though that this is the fastest clear time right now, the phase hasn't ended yet, so there's still faster times to be had. And especially, these people are still bringing a Boomkin. No other phase did the top time have a Boomkin. Boomkins are not good, so drop this Boomkin for another Warlock. Again, they're having double enhance, triple resto, which is suggested. Again, triple mage. They don't have 4 warriors, but they probably have 4 warriors. And then warlocks, 4 warlock. So that's the comp. And then I will show ZA. So ZA's only been out for a few weeks, but as you can see, the DPS comp is very similar to Kara, even though Kara was 10 months ago. Not much has changed in the meta. The best is still the best, so mages are still the best. Warriors have gained a little bit of ground on warlocks, but now they're gapping them pretty hard. Warlocks are still in third though. Hunters are decent, especially if there's not that much AoE trash, but again, you're just seeing the bear tank, pally tank, which is needed, shadow priest, which is needed, in all the supporting roles. So while people made a lot of different tier lists for different phases, I think this is kind of irrelevant. The meta really hasn't changed. Maybe there's small amounts like dropping elementals, elemental shamans for enhanced shamans. Maybe now you're bringing 4 warriors instead of 2 warriors. But yeah, the meta really hasn't changed. So the final thing I'll show is just the best comp. I've already talked about it a bunch. Highlight Fury Warrior, Destruction Warlock, and Arcane Mages. Focus all your supports into them. 3 of your healers will be support healers, bringing raid buffs. Obviously going to bring the Prop Paladin, and you're obviously going to bring the Feral Druids. Let me know what you think about the tier list, why you think people screwed up so much on some of the DPS classes, most notably undervaluing Fury Warriors and overvaluing BM Hunters, Elemental Shamans, and Fire Mages. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get to them. Thanks.